I wanted to talk today about a couple of things, some forward-thinking ideas, and I'll do a little demo that is on a prototype system. But my talk is about anti-fragile systems, innovation, and learning organizations. So I have to talk a little about anti-fragile. We all know what fragility is. It's you shake something and it might break. And so what's the opposite of that? Well, most people would say that the opposite is robust. You give it a shake and it stays the same. But Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book on anti-fragile says there's something that's even less fragile than robust. And this is something that when you disturb it, it actually gets stronger. It actually gets better. Now, this is of course, completely crazy, because what in the real world ever does that? But it turns out that there's actually a lot of things like that. Muscles are adaptive, and that makes the body anti-fragile. If you exercise your muscle, it gets bigger, it gets stronger. And there's a lot of things in the body that actually behave this way. Biosystems in general behave this way, and what I'm going to argue is that organizations do as well. And the stability of the human body comes not because the parts are extremely well defined precisely and in a particular shape, but this adaptability, this constant changing creates homeostasis, which gives you the stability. And it's the same thing that makes organizations stable. Now, learning is adaptive. You want to learn to play the piano, you sit down at the keyboard, you start doing it. If you want to learn to play tennis, you get out there, you start hitting the ball around. Nobody sits down and plots out exactly how hard they're going to hit a particular key with a particular finger. You've got to practice it because learning is adaptive. Now, what I want to talk about is a learning organization and how we would support a learning organization. Now, there's different ranges of organizations. Some are very, very routine and do very predictable things. And we've talked a lot about tools for doing that. But I'm going to talk about the other end, which is if you have a very creative organization and a very innovative organization, what kind of IT system do you need? Now, when we think about a perfect IT system, we always think of something somewhat like this, okay? Very, very complicated. The pieces and the parts are extremely well crafted into a particular shape. They mesh perfectly together and everything runs. And in a watch, you've got these jewel movements, right? Because they'll put a very hard stone in there. The harder it is, the longer and more reliable this watch will be. So in many ways, designing an IT system on these kind of principles makes a lot of sense. But in BPM, we're modeling organizations, right? We're talking about modeling roles of people in organizations. And here's the thing, organizations aren't machines. If you think about your organization as a machine, you're probably falling prey to what I call the Enlightenment bias. And this bias, there's a couple of aspects to it, but it does come from Newton and Descartes and Enlightenment philosophy. But typically you'll think that the subparts of a complex system are going to be simpler than the system overall. So if you want to attack a complex system, you break it into pieces, and those pieces will be understandable on their own. The other thing is that a stable system is made from very hard, very durable subparts. So if you're designing a car and you want that car to run forever, these things make sense. I mean, you can design a part of a car separate from the rest of the car, and you want those pieces to be extremely well manufactured. You want them to fit perfectly together and made out of something very hard and durable so that the car runs for a long time. But organizations are not machines, and they run on a different set of principles. In fact, Taleb would go as far as to say stability is a time bomb. Now, Taleb's book is about the financial markets and the way that they are anti-fragile, but I would extend that concept to organizations in general and say that we need to consider this. Now, how can it be a time bomb? If we take an anti-fragile system or an adaptive, complex adaptive system, and you protect it, or if you expose it, in the protected case, what can happen is that it'll become weaker. It'll actually become fragile because of protection. And the best way to explain this is, first of all, you know that if you don't exercise at all, your muscles atrophy, you get weaker, and you can actually be hurt by something that wouldn't hurt a healthy person. On the other hand, exercise is healthy and it works well. The same thing in organizations. If you protect an organization from having to handle variances and having to deal with things, they lose the ability to deal with that. There's lots of other examples of this. Forests, we know that if you protect a forest from forest fires, the tinder builds up to the point where a forest fire can actually produce a lot more damage than before. And that's because a forest is a complex adaptive system. Another example of protecting is monocultures. If you grow the same crop for hundreds and hundreds of miles, while it makes some things easier about farming, you can also have the problem that a disease or a pest can come in and wipe out the whole crop. The damage can be much, much more than if you kept a variety of things in there. And we know that ecosystems are stable because of the variety of different things that are mixed in there. It's that variety and that ability to adapt that produces the extreme stability that you see in most ecosystems. Now, Taleb points out that nature loves small errors, but humans don't. And this represents a human mental bias against doing things that work in an adaptive system or in an anti-fragile system. And I would call this the Enlightenment bias. It's the same thing. So we need to be careful when we think about systems, we think about organizations, not to confuse them with machinery, which run on different principles. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that if you enforce a single practice on an organization, it can make that organization fragile. Now, if you remember nothing else from my talk, this is the key, okay? This is the takeaway. And what do we need to then think about when we design IT systems for it? Now, there's a wide variety of different behaviors, and so on the far left, we have very, very predictable behaviors. On the far right, we have very, very unpredictable behaviors. We've spent most of the conference on a little bit more on the left end. Now, there was an awful lot of talk about adding tasks in dynamically. And that was great. In fact, it was really good to see how much attention there is being put to that. I just want to clarify that I'm talking about a specific domain here where there's a certain repeatability. I mean, you know, people sort of learn to do things, but there's not enough return on investment to do heavy modeling of those things. So in this domain, which is the domain that you would use adaptive case management, planning becomes important. And planning is this, it is an activity that's done at runtime. You don't try to eliminate planning by doing all the planning up front and having plans, but as Eisenhower said, planning itself is an important activity that you do as part of your work. So Prigogine says that the future is uncertainty, but that's where creativity comes from. And if you have a creative, innovative organization, you need to allow for that. But if you're going to be in an unpredictable world, the best investments are those that minimize the importance of predictions. Okay? If you don't know what customer you're going to be having lunch with 6 months from now, you'd better not have a system that requires you to say what customer you're going to have lunch with 6 months from now. Now, this is all either very, very obvious or very disturbing. And it's pretty straightforward, really, but this is just saying let's keep the flexibility in. And the last 3 talks, we talked an awful lot about flexibility. Now, my example is going to be a home purchase example. And when a home is bought and sold, there's a lot of people that have to collaborate on it. And there's a lot of different pieces that go into it. And there's a certain amount of repeatability, but there's also, you know, local differences that are really different from case to case. So I'm going to walk you through the example that I'm going to do here. And Mr. and Mrs. Byers has purchased a house, and they've engaged Alex, who's an escrow agent, and he is going to create a case. And that case is going to be an empty case. Let me go through this a little bit slower. It's just going to be a plain vanilla empty case. Nothing is, in fact, pre-programmed for this situation. He's going to ask the buyers to put their contract into there, and then he's going to read the contract, because as an escrow agent, the contract tells you what you're going to have to do. So you don't know what you're going to have to do until you read the contract. He's going to then search around in the company and try to find a case that's kind of similar to that, bring that in. He'll assign some tasks to some of the people. And he'll also engage Ernie. Now, Ernie is an outside service provider who does title searches, and he does assessments and things like that. That's his job, so he's in that business. And this contract has a very unusual provision, okay? The buyers looked at some trees, and the trees looked diseased. And they asked if they were, and the seller said, no, absolutely not. They're not diseased, they're healthy. So what happens? That gets put into the contract. There's now a provision in the contract that the trees are going to be inspected and guaranteed, not to be diseased. Well, Alex has never done this before. He's never seen this, what I call a unique task. It's a task that's never been done before, may never be done again, but it's his job to do that. So he's going to add a task for that, and he's going to bring in a guy named Tony to do it. He'll search and find some directory and put him in there and do that. Meanwhile, Ernie, he's running his own office, and he wants to also bring in some of his people, but he doesn't want to do it in this case that is Alex's case. He needs to have his own space because of access control reasons and flexibility reasons. And he may put some documents in here that he doesn't really want to share with everyone else. So it's kind of an access control mechanism, and he links these cases so that when he's done, documents can flow both ways through these cases. Finally, I'll give a short example of how you can start with a task and turn it into a sub-project. That's another kind of flexibility that we need to think about so that you can bring others in and sort of do the same sort of thing. And these can be on separate servers. These can be fully distributed. Everything's through web services in there. So with that, let me get on to the demo. And let me hope my network connection is still running here. So this is my user, Alex. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a prototype. It is not for sale, so it's not a production thing, but I use it to demonstrate the principles. So Alex, the first thing he does is he's going to create a project, and he's going to call it Buyers Escrow. And there's some other things that you can set up here, but what I'd like to emphasize is that he's creating here a plain vanilla case that has nothing else in it. In fact, he's not creating a case at all. All right. There are no notes in there. There's no goals in there. You can call goals tasks if you want, but and there's no documents in there. It's just completely empty. But he can actually accomplish his goals on this. We'll be filling those in later. First thing he does is he asks the buyers to put in their contract. Okay, so this is not a pre-planned part of this case that's specific to case management, but just, sending and receiving documents is the kind of thing that you want to do. So send me the contract, please. And all I needed to know was their email message. And that's going to cause an email message like this to be sent. And in fact, I think I can show you that. There it is. So this message was just sent, and it brings those people in. So we saw a couple of examples this week of mechanisms to bring people into cases without having to sign them up ahead of time. And that's kind of this social capability, and that's necessary. So they receive a thing like this, and it says upload your contract. So they do the obvious thing. They pick the contract file, and they upload the document. And so they've been brought into this, and there's been no muss, no fuss. All right, so they're basically done, but let's go back to what Alex was looking at. And so the first thing he's, of course, going to do is read the contract, because he doesn't really know what his job's going to be until he's actually read that. So he does that, and he's probably going to use the note capability to write some notes about what he thinks needs to be done, and I'm going to simulate that here by just copying a bunch of this text out and basically saying, okay, let's create a note here, because that'll help us, see what's going on. So overview. All right, so he's created a note, and it's now part of the case, appearing there in the notes section. And now he's read enough of it to know that it looks like a standard townhouse case. He's never done townhouses. He's done a number of other kinds of cases, but he has a colleague that has done townhouses. Has done a good one, and it was over in Georgetown. So let's go search for that case that's in the system. Now, what I'd like to emphasize is that this is not something that a programmer went and did. This is just a case that was there. And by choosing this and by going to project settings, I can go here and mark this as a template. So now that what somebody else was using as a running case becomes my template. I can go back to this escrow project that we started, and I can copy everything from that template in. So I just go down to here, and you can see I've got my other templates, but now the townhouse case appears there as a template, and we can copy it in. And what that did is it brought in these tasks from the other template, and I can decide what I want to do with this now. And this is the planning part of it. So what we'll do is, I'll ask someone, Charles, to go and do an inspection, because that's kind of what we do first, and identify a mortgage provider. Maybe I decide on this case that this is something that we don't need to do. So I can just put not needed here, and I can mark this as skipped. So I'm sort of deciding which of all of these various tasks that I've sort of got in the library. The title report, that's going to have to be assigned to our friend Ernie. So let's go do that. And that's how Ernie receives a notification and gets informed about it. You've all seen this sort of thing before. Now, there was that special thing in the contract about trees. So it's down here. There's this condition, special condition. I've never seen it before. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it. But without having to know anything about how I accomplish this, I can make it a goal of the project. So I can just say inspect trees here. And I paste that description in there. And I go around and I look up. Later I could find the person to do it, but for the sake of the demo, let me just put them in right now. And so by doing that, I've now got a task in my process, assign trees, and I can, and I can move this around and decide, what I think needs to be done first and what not. And so this is what we mean by a very flexible, task-oriented way of just creating things as a task list and making them available. And then also associated with that was this reference document here. And so I'd like to attach that to the project, and I could just download that and attach it, go to here and, upload the document like the way, we normally do. But for this demo, I'd like to show this link to repository idea. And what I'm going to do is actually put the URL from the document here. And this could be to a WebDAV URL or various types of document repositories. In this case, it happens to just be a web file. So I'm just going to say access it as a public web, and put a little note on that for what relevance it is. Notice that I can choose roles, like whether the buyer's role or the assessor reports role has access to that. And I link it to the project. Then the key here is it's gone out to the web right now, and it's downloaded that document and put it in here, attached it. But the difference here is that it remembers where it came from. So that if that document gets changed, it can be downloaded again. And this is really important, the idea that documents aren't fixed in time and that you just move them around as pieces, but this becomes a flow that can flow into this project. All right, well now I'm going to log out as Alex, and I'm going to log in as a different guy. I'm going to log in as Ernie. So let me do that. And it's going to look very much the same. But let me go to there. So what he sees his things, and he goes and looks at his goals, and he sees now that there's a goal here to get the title record, and so he can go in and see the process, and all the systems do this and give you information. So he reads a little bit here. He's been assigned this, and he realizes he wants to bring his own team in to do this. So he needs to create his own space. But we want to make a link from this space to his space, and it's got to be access control and protected. So the way he does that is he goes down into here and creates what we call a streaming link. And here he can choose the view, so there can be an access controlled sub-view of the project that's being linked to. A number of days, it can be read-only, but he creates a streaming link. And I wish there was a better way to link this up. It's actually not very satisfying doing it this way, but it does, in fact, work. And I think that's one of the things we need to work on, is a standard way to link projects together like this. Now what he's going to do is go back to his own projects and create a new project, which I'm going to call buyer's sub-project, just so that we can keep it straight here. He might not do that. He can choose from his templates, but the most important thing is that he pastes this upstream link here. And by having that link, he now creates a project. This is a new project. It's brand new. There's no notes, goals, and things in there. But what he can do is go down here and look at the synchronizing. And it's saying that the upstream project has a couple of documents in it, a note in it, a bunch of goals. And by clicking on synchronize here, he can bring it in. So this will allow him to do two-directional synchronization between his project and the upstream project. So it's brought in some tasks, and his template brought some other tasks in here, and he can assign them and decide what order to do them. And he can attach documents and synchronize them back up. So you get the basic idea that we've done an awful lot with really very low-tech capabilities here, as long as we just have this thing that communicates among the people. The last thing I want to demonstrate is this concept of, let me go back up to where he was. So let's go back to this task here we created for this tree guy. We could do this with any of the tasks, but the demo scenario is that, so I assigned this out to this guy, and I didn't know who he was, but he had some worker go out there and he fell through the roof, and there's now damage, and what I thought was going to be a fairly straightforward task ended up being a whole project on itself. So one of the things that we put in here is this ability to take any task and turn it into a project on the fly without having to, basically redesign things and move things around. So I just say click create subproject, and when I now look at my list of goals, if I look at all the goals, the state has changed here to waiting, and this becomes linked to a subproject, and that's an empty project which you can now continue to do more work and bring other people into. So I hope that gives you an idea of, again, of the principles. There's 8 of them, and let me go through what I've shown you. Radical decentralization, okay? We went through a couple of projects there. They're linked together, documents flow through them, but there's no single center of the universe. Why? Because everybody thinks they are the center of the universe. There's more than one cloud. Even though this stuff is running in the cloud, doesn't mean that it's all going to be in the same place. You have to worry about copying things because access control and ownership is most important. Documents on the wing. Don't think about documents as static things, but when you get a document, it may in fact change in the future. So think about them as flowing through these different projects, and your project space, your project folder, can be not just a collection of documents, but a source that continues to collect. Plan to succeed. Planning is part of the work that you do. It's not something to be eliminated by process design up front. Embrace mid-flight changes. So starting as a task, turning it into a project, that happens all the time. You don't know ahead of time which of your tasks are going to turn into projects. Tedium is no friend. You've got a million documents, but going to each document and doing access control on it is not the way to do it. There needs to be some sort of grouping, and that's where we use these projects to group, and we use roles to group things so that it just comes out of the work. Don't fight the unknown. Partial constructs, leave them open. You can resolve them later. So don't force everything to go up front. And finally, it all emerges. I mean, I think as Dave made clear, there's no distinction between runtime and design time. It happens while you work. Everything I did here was not pre-programmed specifically for this case, but is a set of simple capabilities that can be used to actually accomplish work. So with that brings me to the Q&A.